Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of JT Talks Jobs. This is the show that teaches you everything school didn't about career growth and job search. I am so excited today to be talking to you about the one skill you definitely need to be developing if you want to be able to get a job post-crisis. But before I do that, just a couple of reminders. First of all, make sure that you're following me here on LinkedIn if you want to get notifications about when we go live. We go live every Tuesday and Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you like that notification, you have to follow me here. Secondly, make sure that you check out the new JT Talks Jobs podcast. We'd love it so much if you would go over. It's on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple, iTunes, like it's everywhere. And I'm so grateful for my team for that. But lots of interesting information. Also a great way to catch some of our past episodes as well. So we'd be so happy if you would go over and check that out too. All right. Well, enough on that self-promotion. Let's move on and have a really good conversation today about a skill that you want to develop right now while this is all still going on in order to prepare for the job market post-crisis. So the first thing that you need to think about is what employers will be looking for. And it'll be very different than what they were looking for pre-crisis. So to help you understand that in pre-crisis, the unemployment rate was very, very low. And employers were really struggling to find the right talent. And they needed people to have certain hard skills because they didn't want to spend a lot of time training them. They needed them to hit the ground running. So employers would have been looking for these hard skills, these skills that you meant you could do the job as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Post-crisis, they're going to be looking for a lot more. They're going to be expecting a lot more from you. And that's because there'll be more choice. Now, you hear all the time about the idea of supply and demand, the law of supply and demand. Well, just think about that in this case. When the crisis is over, there's going to be thousands of people looking for work and competing for the same job. So that means there'll be a lot of supply, but not as much demand, because what we're also now learning is that a lot of these companies are not going to bring back all their workers. They're not going to rehire or grow their businesses to the levels that they were at before. The truth is, many companies are going to scale back and stay smaller in order to maintain profitability and try to gain back some of the losses that they had so that they can become a more stable business and then start to hire again. So there'll be, a lot fewer jobs available post-crisis, which is going to drive up the competition between job seekers. So if that's the case, now employers will have to, it's not even a case of being pickier, will have to have more criteria in order to choose, because right now, if you were to just base it on experience like they were pre-crisis, it would be like having this huge bushel of apples, 100 apples in a bushel, and they all pretty much look the same. How do you pick one? Well, now you're going to have to start to add in all these little things. Are you, if you're going to eat the apple, are you hungrier today? So you need the apple to be bigger, or do you want the apple to be a certain color or to be shinier? And the reality is hiring is discrimination. And people don't like to hear that, especially because there's certain discrimination that's certainly illegal in protected classes. But when it comes down to the final selection, all things being equal on your experience, there's going to be these other skills, these soft skills, these things about you that they will help them decide which person to choose. And that's what we need to think about right now. And what is that? It's professional presence. So your professional presence is how you project your knowledge, your skills, your wisdom, how you project what kind of person you'll be to work with, and how you communicate, how you connect with other people. It's the total package. Right? Think about your presence, how people see and react to you, how they respond to you. And so you have nonverbal presence, which is how you look, right? Your appearance. We say people hear what they see. It's a famous quote by an actress named Doris Day. And what it simply means is that people have preconceived notions and make associations. So when they see your look, what you're wearing, that sort of thing, it starts to form an impression. And in their mind, they start to hear things. And that's where that comes from. So that's part of the nonverbal professional presence. And, depending on what industry you're in or what skill level you're at, you may dress a certain way because of that. So I think of, for example, there are some iconic examples of nonverbal professional presence. One of them would be Steve Jobs, the way at the end he always wore a turtleneck and jeans. or Mark Zuckerberg, who's always wearing the same color t-shirt and jeans. These are conscious efforts to look and feel a certain way. Their choice is sending a message about how they look at the world, and people interpret that, right? Whereas you might go into a law office and see somebody really dressed up in a suit. That's also meant to impress in a certain way. Or if you were to go into a creative agency where you needed them to have a lot of cool ideas, they might dress in a very edgy fashion, right? Very creative to represent who they are. So there's this nonverbal professional presence that becomes important. But really, the verbal, what we say and what we do, is going to play an even bigger role in how people see us. And what we've learned through studies is that post-crisis, employers are looking for something specific. They're looking for traits that will help them get through a crisis situation. So let's look at those a little bit. The first one is vision. So when you're giving off a professional presence, you're going to want to be able to articulate and talk in a way that says, hey, I can see the future. I can see possibilities. I can see opportunities. After this is over, employers aren't going to want to hire someone that in their professional presence, the way they talk and act, they sound negative. They sound defeated. They, shoot down ideas. They find problems with things. I'm not saying that you should be Pollyannish or that you should be overly optimistic. It's not what I'm suggesting. What I'm saying is vision sees possibilities. Vision focuses on what could happen more than what can't happen. And so you want to think about your professional presence and how you're giving that impression off that you have vision, that you can see the future, and that you can see opportunities. The second aspect of professional presence post-crisis that you're going to want to really develop and project is humility. There are going to be lots of people unemployed. Right now, I saw a stat as of this week that said in the US alone, we're somewhere between 25 to 45% unemployment, depending on where you are. That is higher than the highest we ever had in the Great Depression. Now, again, when this is over, a lot of jobs will come back, but not all of them. So we're going to need a lot of humility in order to show the fact that we understand how lucky we are to be on a job interview, to be considered for a job when we know so many other people are looking and a lot of other people aren't going to be landing jobs in the near future. So projecting that humility, very important post-crisis. The third thing is practical knowledge, also called practical wisdom. So one of the things you're going to need to give off is the fact that I've taken all that I've learned in my life, in my career, and I've thought about how I can use it to the advantage of my employer, that I have experienced a lot of things and I've learned from them and I've grown from them. And now I want to use that growth to your advantage as my employer. So that's very, very key. When you're in an interview and they're asking you questions, you need to talk about your past experiences in a way that can show them that, hey, I'm smarter and stronger and have more value as a result of all these things that have happened to me. And that's why I'm excited to use that, added knowledge and experience and strength for you. And there's a very specific way that you need to be able to communicate that without coming across cocky or like you're bragging or you're overconfident. Remember what I said, you need humility. So you need vision, you need humility, and you need this practical knowledge. So you can see that there's a really fine balance here that you need to develop. This is why your professional presence, developing it as a skill in terms of how you're pushing yourself out to the world, is so important. The fourth one is composure. So after a crisis, a lot of people are going to have some kind of post-traumatic stress. And there are predictions that very large numbers of people will have post-traumatic stress disorder. However, I was just reading today that in crisis of this magnitude, we will actually maybe not see as much post-traumatic stress disorder as we think. We will see something called post-traumatic growth. When something like this happens to so many people simultaneously, we don't feel singled out. We don't feel like this is happening just to me. And so post-traumatic stress disorder comes from, hey, this happened to me and nobody can possibly understand it. And I'm very stressed out and I don't know how to cope. But when you're surrounded by lots of other people who are going through the same thing and they're all openly sharing how they're coping and they're all working through it together, there is this exciting thought process that we can create post-traumatic growth and it can happen a lot quicker. Why am I telling you this? Well, a sign that somebody is in post-traumatic growth mode would be composure. They would not be stressed. They would not talk in a negative way or be shaky or seem, scared, which is not something you're going to want to present in an interview, right? You're going to want to be able to show composure, that you are okay, that you're not overly stressed, that you're not overreacting to what's happening. Yes, it's traumatic, but that you can stay neutral. Neutral is not, you don't have to be overly optimistic or, fake positive, but at least neutral and composed and not looking rattled or frustrated or scared. And then I already hinted at it. The last one is neutral thinking. So every time you talk, there is some subjectivity to it, meaning you put your values and your beliefs and your feelings into what you're saying. If you are projecting anything negative, that comes through. Even the best people who think that they can hide it can't. There are so many tells, as they say in poker, so many giveaways when somebody is secretly negative or stressed or frustrated. Neutral thinking is really just looking at the facts, not attaching emotion or feeling, not assuming that something is bad or good. It just is, and working with what you have. And this is a very important aspect of professional presence, because as we start to hire back, employers will be looking for people with fresh perspective. They'll be looking for people who aren't going to bring a lot of baggage with them. And if you think about it, sometimes they won't hire people back because they're going to feel like those people are going to come back and want to talk about the good old days and how it used to be and want to get back to those days that are completely gone and will never come back. So a neutral thinker wouldn't do that. They wouldn't look back. They would look forward. They would look at what they have in front of them, what is the reality, and what can they do with that reality. That's what a good neutral thinker does. And being able to convey that in your professional presence is huge. So those are the 5 characteristics that studies show that post a crisis, it's really important to convey those factors in your professional presence. But I talked about professional presence being a skill. Well, the way to develop the right professional presence is through your career story. And so for those of you that aren't familiar with this concept, the career story is you connecting the dots about yourself in a way that is compelling and meaningful and, of course, conveys these traits. And that requires skill. You need to be good at telling your career story. Now, I'm not suggesting that you have to be some extroverted, amazing public speaker. That is not the case. But anybody that truly wants to get a good job post-crisis is going to have to be able to articulate their career story in a way that they're comfortable with. And if you think about it, it all comes down to the idea of talking about how you became. This is one of the best ways to develop a career story that will work post-crisis. And all you'd have to do is think about your specialty. If you've listened to this show regularly, you know I talk about this idea that you have to explain how you add value. You have to explain how you save or make a company enough money to justify the cost of hiring you, which is about 130 to 140% of your salary. Because it's not just the salary they have to pay the taxes, and they have to pay the operations costs for you and the benefits and the training costs and all these other things. So it's very important that you think of yourself as a business of one, selling your services to an employer, and that you're focused on explaining how much value you bring that will justify that cost. Now, one of the ways we justify our cost is by talking about the problems we solve and the pain that we alleviate, because they don't just hire us because they like us. They hire us because we're making their lives easier or better. And so alleviating a pain or solving a problem is what we get paid to do. That is your specialty. And when you can tell the story about how you became who you are today based on that, you're going to be able to tell a really compelling story that has very strong professional presence, right? So if I was going to tell you the story of how I became a career coach, I could walk you through my own trials and tribulations. I could talk you through why this became so important to me and the audience that I wanted to serve. And in doing so, if I do it correctly, I will convey what? I can convey my vision about, how over the last almost 20 years, I have been focused on this and what I wanted to accomplish. I could talk about humility, about how difficult it was and the challenges and how much respect I have for the people around me. I could talk about practical knowledge, everything that I've learned along the way. I can have composure, meaning I can say, look, I've learned so much that here's what I know, and you can trust me based on this. And let me give you examples. And I can talk about neutral thinking. I can say, because I'm so entrenched in this industry, in this business, in this type of work, here's what I'm seeing now and in the future. Here's how I think we're going to have to handle everything that's happened to us post-crisis, right? So by telling my story of how I became a career coach and really thinking about checking these boxes in the story, humility, practical knowledge, composure, and neutral thinking, and the vision, the fifth one, the vision, I'm going to do a statistically better job of pushing out my professional presence in a way that's going to make sense to you and resonate with you, mean connect with you, mean you're going to trust me, hopefully like it, and want to hire me, right? That's how that works. So a lot of people have never thought about this as a skill, but I cannot stress it enough how much a skill having professional presence is and how important it is. And I just want to show you something. We have studies that show that when somebody is evaluating your professional presence, so think about a hiring manager and they're looking at you, this is the breakdown. 35% is your depth of knowledge. So how detailed can you get in explaining what you do and how you do it? 14% of it is how you looked. Remember, so I said the appearance. Are you wearing tennis shoes and a hoodie? Are you wearing a three-piece suit, right? Does your appearance match the type of work that you do, your genre, whatever it is? But look at that, a whopping 51%. 51% is about how you articulate that knowledge. Your communication, how your character comes off to them. Even more so than how much knowledge you have. So, we have job seekers all the time come to me and say, it's not fair, JT. They gave the job to somebody else and I clearly had more experience, right? I clearly had more gravitas than that person. And we say, yes, but you know what? Somewhere along the line, the way you communicated yourself did not land in a way that made them feel like you would be the right person for their organization. Also, appearance could be a factor, but probably a smaller one. I would tell you about 95% of the time, if somebody didn't get the job, it's because their communication style, right, their professional presence wasn't as strong a fit as somebody else's. It's not to say that your professional presence was bad or flawed in any way. Again, it's just coming down to, with so many people competing for jobs, they're looking for the professional presence that really connects with them the best. And that's something I want to make sure that everyone understands here. Because when you don't get chosen for a job, your immediate thought should not be that you failed in some way and that something's wrong with you. It's not the case. They didn't say no, not ever. They said no, not today. They had to pick someone else that they felt was a better fit. But that company might hire again. And there might be a position that you're an even better fit for. So focusing on delivering great professional presence is one of the ways that you can at least keep the relationship going in the event another opportunity arises. All right. So I want to give you 2 tips before I start taking questions on this. My first tip when it comes to developing your skill set in terms of presenting your professional presence is to write it out and edit it. So that story of how I became a, accountant, how I became a digital marketer, how I became a healthcare worker, how I became an admin, whatever it is, think about that story, write it out, and go back and think about those 5 things: vision and composure and practical knowledge, right? And humility and oh gosh, I'm even forgetting the 5th one because I'm so tired. Let's go back. And neutral thinking. There we go. Let me say it again. So vision, humility, practical knowledge, composure, and neutral thinking. If you can write out your story, right? If you can actually say, let me write that out and let me read it back. And then let me sleep on it at night. Let me write it out again and read it back. And let me read it out loud. And let me read it to somebody. What will happen is you will start to see whether or not you're hitting on all 5 of those elements if you're making sure that it's, we say, landing the right way. And that's very important. A lot of people like to go out and wing it. They just like to shoot from the hip. But a lot of times when you do that, you end up saying and ah and pausing a lot and getting all over the board. And that really loses credibility. So make sure you take the time to write out the answers to the question, how I became this, but also All of the behavioral questions, all of the questions where you get to tell a story, you should be prepping for those in advance as part of your professional presence. And then the second thing I'm going to tell you, again, is to practice your voice tone and pace. For those of you that have never worked with somebody on that, it's very important that you make sure that you're not talking too quickly or too slow. Both of those are a negative. Too quickly, it's hard for people to follow you and you seem nervous and rushed. Too slow, and people think that you're struggling to answer the questions and that you're nervous and you don't have the answers. So you have to find a tone and a pace that's positive and that keeps going at a level that people can absorb and they feel confident that you know what you're talking about. In fact, studies have shown that people that really can master tone and pace are the most reputable, because people assume if you can speak like that, then you must have all that knowledge in your head, which means you really must know what you're saying. So practicing, very important. There's a reason that Toastmasters was invented. People hate public speaking, and oftentimes, an interview is public speaking and showing your professional presence. So that practice becomes really, really important. So again, to recap, step one, write it out. Tip number one, and edit it and make sure that all 5 of those critical things are showing in your professional presence. Step 2, practice. Practice, practice, practice. Record yourself, play it back, introduce yourself to friends and family. I know it sounds crazy, but the more you practice, the better. Now, before I take questions, one resource I always try to recommend a resource, and one resource I want to recommend over on workitdaily.com/resources, we've got an interview prep guide that lists out all the most common behavioral questions. And I mentioned those are really important because behavioral questions are open-ended questions that you're asked where you tell a story. So besides talking about how you became who you are today, knowing how to answer these questions in a way that conveys all those things I've spoke about will help your professional presence be really consistent. And again, there's going to be an incredible amount of competition post-crisis, and this is how you're able to stand out. So folks, I cannot stress it enough. Job search is a skill. Professional presence is a skill. And the sooner you start working on this right now, the better. Okay? All right. Well, I cannot wait to start answering your questions. So let's get down to that and let's see what we've got here today. So Rodrigo says, my mother language is Spanish. English is good, but I lack vocabulary and grammar structures. In an interview for a position, should I point this out as a weakness and mention I'm working on it? So I think that I think it's going to come clear in an interview, Rodrigo, that it's your second language. There is absolutely nothing wrong with going on the offensive. And by that, I mean calling out and saying, one of my challenges is obviously English is my second language. However, here's how I'm working on that. And here's how I'm making progress around that. I think that's absolutely welcomed. And it's important that you articulate that because they do need to hear that you see it as something that isn't a strength, but that you're working towards making it a strength because you understand it's important. So yes, most definitely. Lydia says, how do you bounce back if you're underemployed and still in school for an undergrad degree? I've had 18 years in active field that no longer exists, so I went into the frontline responder as an EMS. We make less per week than those receiving unemployment. Oh, wow. So there's a lot in that question there, Lydia. First of all, I want to say something. Good for you working the job when you know that there's a higher paycheck out there on unemployment. Good for you. Those skills and working through the crisis are very important and you are extremely valued. And it shows incredible, incredible character, Lydia. Make no mistake, that's going to be points in your favor. You want to talk about professional presence? I think when the time comes for you to interview, you're going to be able to talk about what it was like to be on the front lines and knowingly doing a job that pays less than unemployment and putting yourself in harm's way. That, my friend, is a powerful story. See what I mean about being able to have professional presence and talking about why it was important to you to keep that job and do that work? That's going to convey an awful lot about who you are and what your character's like. At the same time, work on those skills. I want you to get very comfortable answering some of those challenging questions. Make a list of every question that scares you. Every question you're afraid they're going to ask, and then work on an answer for that until you're so sick of studying that question that you literally can't wait for them to ask it. So we have a class inside Work It Daily called Fired to Hired. And in that class, we have a whole series of questions that, somebody who's been fired is afraid to ask, like, why were you let go? And why did you leave your last job? And what did you do wrong? These are scary, hard questions. But when you work through your answers, right, professional presence, and really make peace with them, and there's a whole system that we teach people on how to take accountability and talk it through so it shows all of those aspects that we're talking about. But when you do that, you're going to be so prepared. You'll find that when you go in the interview, you'll be waiting for them to ask you these tough questions, and they never do. And the reason they don't is because there's something in your demeanor that comes through as composed and confident, not scared, right? It shows. So the best thing you can do when you're underemployed is to prepare for that day when you get that interview. Ernest says, if my employer called to see if I'm okay, and does this mean that they will hire back the person? Let me see. If an employer called to see if you're okay, it does not mean they will hire you back. It does not. It means they care about you, which is awesome. And I love that they're reaching out to you and checking in on you. I think that that's huge, but there's no guarantee that they'll hire you back. That's the thing. No employer can. In fact, these employers that are saying they will not lay off, you can't make that promise. You can't say that. And for those people that have been furloughed, not all those positions are going to come back. And so I don't mean to be dark on that. And it's just that it's the reality. And I would rather people prepare and work on their professional presence and get ready and have all their materials ready so that if they don't get brought back, they can immediately start looking for it, because there's nothing more crushing than to sit there and think everything's going to be fine and find out that it isn't, and that you wasted all this time that you could have been using to prepare, right? So I wouldn't assume that at all. And I would work off the idea that it's not going to happen. Darlene says, interviewing is drying up and I'm wondering what I should do moving forward. I'm thinking of contacting my contacts on LinkedIn, asking them to keep me in mind when hiring starts back. Darlene, you can do that. The problem is lots of people are going to do that. And I think it's better to add some value. So a couple weeks ago, and if you go back to the hashtag JT Talks Jobs, by the way, one of the easiest ways, folks, to go back and find our older versions of these videos is the hashtag JT Talks Jobs if you follow it on LinkedIn or over on YouTube. But we did one about 10 unique networking ideas. And honestly, that's what I would suggest you do. You want to serve your network and give them some value and be top of mind that way. Because if you go right now to all your contacts and say, keep me in mind, how many times can you do that? Once. You can't do that 2 weeks later, and you can't do that another 2 weeks after that. That's desperate. You can't do it. So I would rather you not ask them that to stay in mind. What I'd rather you do is come up with some way that you can send value every 2 weeks that will automatically keep you top of mind. One might be that you host some sort of Zoom meetup and to talk about a certain subject, or maybe you're putting together a list of resources and updating it every couple of weeks and sharing it with a list of people. How can you create value in your space right now? Maybe you're finding the top 5 articles or videos on your subject, how COVID's affecting your industry, and you're sharing those with your peers. What can you do to help your peer group and share that so that you could go back again and again and again and continue to add value and stay top of mind at the same time? I love this name. Chi-Chi knows best. Hey, Chi-Chi. Which certification is taken more seriously, the PHR or SHRM, if I want to move up from becoming a recruiting coordinator to an HR generalist? I can't really pick one over the other for you because I don't want to get in trouble with those organizations, to be perfectly honest. I think that if you can, most people try to eventually get both. I would just advise you, whichever one is longer or harder, maybe you could start with that one and bang that one out first and get that out of the way and go for the shorter, easier one second. That would just be my advice. But yeah, I can't pick one for you. Lydia says, how long should my career story be while telling it? What's the time frame? I don't want them to be bored listening to my years of experience. Wonderful question. So the best thing that you should do is time yourself and see if it's more than 2 minutes long, you're going to lose them. It's just like watching any kind of video. We know for a fact that after 2 minutes, people start to lose interest unless it is so compelling. Some people can make it to 5 minutes, but my advice to you is it should be about 2 minutes long. That's what most attention can hold. And what will happen is you'll have to edit the story and really put in all the juiciest bits in order to keep their attention, which will make it more compelling. See what I mean about practicing professional presence? This is a great example and a wonderful question. So important that you do that. Look, before we get more questions, folks, just wanted to remind you, if you have not already gone over to check out Work It Daily, we are the #1 career growth club. And what we do is help people with their resumes, their LinkedIn profiles, their cover letters, their interview prep, their networking strategy, in fact, their entire job search strategy. And we do that because we have a set of trained coaches inside our platform that work with you via direct messaging. We even have our very own phone app that you can use to message them. Inside the platform, you're able to message them your documents. They'll look them over. They record a video. They tell you how to fix them. We give you video training that shows you how to fix things and help you get everything perfect. Plus, you're sitting there with a bunch of other like-minded professionals that are also developing their careers, right? And upping their career game and looking to grow their careers. You're going to meet and network with incredible people from all over the world. We have people in 16 countries inside our platform. So I just want to remind you, if you've ever thought you needed support, now's the time. We are cheaper than a gym membership. We are cheaper than what most people spend a week on coffee, right? There's a low monthly membership that you can take advantage of. So go check it out. You can try it for a month and cancel at any time. Why not come in and see what it's like to work with career coaches? We are the #1 career coaching club because we literally were built for social distancing. We are the first and only one that everything is virtual. So come check it out. Get that help you need to prepare for moving forward. All right, back to answering questions. Maria says, I need to communicate better. Who can coach and mentor me? And how do you master your tone and pace? It's an excellent question, Maria. So one of the first places I send people, I could send you to voice coaches. And that would be money well spent working with a voice coach. By the way, there are voice coaches now, for hire virtually that you can do a Zoom session with, just so you know. So that will cost you more money. And you can look for those individuals on all sorts of resources, even sites like Fiverr, by the way. People are, hiring by the hour to do voice coaching. But then there's also groups that you can join. As I mentioned, for many years, there was Toastmasters where people learn to public speak better. And there are virtual versions of that. But also, I'm going to tell you, I'm a huge YouTube fan. When it comes to subjects like this, before I decide I want to invest money in working with a voice coach or something like that, I will go and search in YouTube and I'll watch a bunch of YouTube videos and find the experts that really resonate with me, really connect with me, and I like what they're saying, and they seem to be teaching me some things. I'll follow their channel for a while. I'll try to watch several of their videos, and then I'll check out their services. And if their services make sense, I'll work with them. And that is the best way. But I will tell you, working with a voice coach and getting some vocal training, even if you don't work with a coach, just work, studying vocal training, it's so worth it, folks. It makes all the difference, I will tell you. Jorge says, how does one know, considering that, let's see, some things in there. I can't read it. How does one know, considering that one has been speaking in a certain way for so long, if one's speaking too fast or too slow? Oh, Jorge, that's really easy. You ask people. You have to ask people. I remember when I first started out in training a lot of years ago, many, many years ago. My speech was fine when I was in the Northeast because I'm from New England. But I would get to Texas and people would say, JT, slow down. You got to talk slower. So you really want to pay attention to how people speak around you. You also want to pay attention to the environment you're in and what you're doing, right? So for somebody like me, when I'm presenting like this, my job is to hold your attention. I've got to actually keep my energy and my voice tone and pace at a slightly faster level than I would if I was in an interview, because I'm trying to keep you engaged. Whereas in an interview, it's probably going to be a little bit more reflective of the person I'm interviewing with. So if the interviewer, the hiring manager, speaks more slowly, I'm going to want to slow things down for that person. If they talk more energetically, I'm going to want to bring it up a notch. So I don't have to change entirely who I am, but I do want to be able to adjust when I'm talking one-on-one and also when I'm talking to a particular group. And when you're talking to a group, you have to think about the demographic, who's in the room, and what most likely would reflect the tone and pace that they would be looking for. And these are all nuances to professional presence that you build over time. I will tell you, Jorge, if you haven't done already, we have a free communication style quiz over at Work It Daily /resources. Go over there. It talks about the 4 communication styles, and they talk about their pace and their tone. So that can be a great first lesson in understanding how you're perceived and how others might misperceive you. And we've done a lot of discussion around that, and we have all this training around it inside Work It Daily as well. But that would at least be a really great free tool for you to start with. Alejandro says, is it okay to reply to a recruiter that you are in several hiring processes during an interview if they ask about that? You can just be really careful, Alejandro. So I want you to, if they ask you, gee, are you interviewing other places? I wouldn't say no. If you are interviewing other places, I wouldn't lie and say no. I would definitely say, yes, I do have several other interview processes that I'm going through. But what you want to say at the end is, but this is the one I'm most excited about. Because if you just say, yes, I'm interviewing at other places, sometimes they'll go, well, you know what? Let's look at other candidates because he's probably going to get picked up by somebody else. So you want to express to them the reason you're at this interview is because you care about this position. Make sure they know that they're the front runner. Otherwise, there's a chance that they might drop you because they figure they're going to lose out anyways, and they don't want to waste their energy on a candidate who isn't going to join them. So you got to be really careful on how you answer that one. Kevin says, how much do employers value experience over college degrees? I see guys that are high up in management in the oil patch with no college degree. You know what, Kevin? And that's because back then, a lot fewer people had college degrees in that industry. So we have a massive saturation of college degrees that's occurred over the last 30 years. 40, 50 years ago, not everybody left high school and got a college degree. Now everybody does. A very high percentage of people get some form of a college degree, which has watered down the effectiveness of college degrees. And is why we have such a debt crisis going on with college degrees. So those folks that have lots of years of experience, they didn't get degrees back then. That industry didn't requirement. They just went to work, they built their experience up, and now they have what's called a working education. Today, as a way to weed people out, they now make new standards, which is, okay, you're entry level, but I need you to have a degree so that I can start to weed some people out. This goes back to my Apple argument. If you were here for this live stream earlier in the broadcast, where I talk about the fact that there are just so many candidates, how does a company figure it out? They discriminate. Hiring is discrimination. And one of the ways they can do that is say, we require a college degree. So it's not one or the other. It has to do with when they joined that particular industry. And even then, for some of them, if they lose their job now, they could struggle because some people might say, well, now we want you to have a degree. And they'll say, I spent 30 years in the industry. And they'll say, no, it's okay. We still want you to have a degree. And now they can't get hired. So it's not, it for every single person, there's some sort of hiring challenge. You're being discriminated against in some way. Let's see. E. Starkey says, I was recently laid off. Should I tell my interviewer? It has been less than 2 weeks and I had an interview yesterday. Well, the thing is, if it didn't come up, that's one thing. But if you actively went through the interview acting like you were working at the company, that's a little odd, because if they find out you were laid off and they find out when you were laid off, it's going to feel like you were intentionally trying to lie. So my advice is, if you're laid off and not working anymore, let's say you got the job interview while you were still working, you get to the interview and they're asking you questions. Well, tell us about your job now and what do you do? At some point you need to say, look, I should be clear with you. Literally in the last week, I was laid off as a result of the crisis. So I can tell you what I did and how it worked. I would definitely be transparent about that. No one's going to fault you for being laid off right now. It just, everyone's being laid off. There's just so many. So, but lying about it in the sense of omitting it and not mentioning it, that can really work against you, especially if they say at the end they want to do reference checks. What are you going to say? Right? You could really be in a pickle. Cornelia says, how do I tweak my story when I want to change careers? So you remember in the beginning of today's session, I talked about really perfecting your professional presence by answering the question, how I became, right? Well, this story then becomes how I decided to change careers. Somewhere in there, there's a compelling story. There's some things that have happened to you that made you realize that you wanted to go in a new direction. I need to understand that. You need to connect the dots for me by telling the story of how I decided to change careers. And it has to be really strong so that as somebody reads it, listens to it, they say, oh yeah, I can see why you want to be in that career now. That makes total sense. So no different. Just think about the how I became, or how I decided, or why I want to do this. They're all stories, behavioral questions with answers. They're stories that you need to tell. Brendan says, my previous employer, my dad, wow, family fallout of 20 years, won't give me a reference or even confirm I work there. If asked in a job interview, how do I get any questions without looking bad? Wow. Okay. So first of all, I'm so sorry. That's always really hard when you have a fallout with family, when you worked with family. So here's the thing. You were there 20 years. Obviously, you were doing something right. I'm also going to assume that you probably have some peers or some people that work there or did work there at some stretch of time with you that could act as references. My advice would be try to get about 5 or 6 of those people to agree to be references for you. And then what I would do is when you go on the interview and they ask why you left, you're going to be transparent and say, this is really hard for me to share, but the owner was my dad. And after 20 years, we had a falling out. And I need to tell you, it's so bad that he won't even give me a reference. So when you call, you won't be able to get through, but here's what I've done. I've gotten 6 peers that over the years know me and know my work, and I've pulled them together and they're acting as references for me. Again, this is such a challenging thing. And now I just want to be able to move on and find new employment and move past this chapter. It's really taught me a lot. It's helped me grow as a person. I know it's only going to make me stronger. And now I'm very excited and curious about what it's going to be like to work for someone else. I think there's going to be real opportunity here. And I'm really looking forward to doing that, hopefully with you. Right? So just go on the offensive, get some references prepared, and be really honest with them about that. Things happen. And Brendan, they'll understand that. And I'm sure with 20 years of experience, they're going to be excited to have you. Deborah says, should you apply for the same position with your previous company's competition? Will the company you'll be applying for to look at this negatively? No, they won't. I don't think so, Deborah. So if you've definitely been laid off and there's no chance of you being hired back and your competitor is actively hiring for your skill set, then why wouldn't you apply and reach out? I think it can be hard sometimes because if you were really into your former employer, you probably were trash talking a little bit the competitor, right? And now you're going to have to walk back on some of that stuff. Or maybe you actually always secretly admired the competitor and thought in some ways they're better than us. Either way, you're going to have to figure out why you would want to work for them instead of your old company and be ready to answer those questions. Because if you applied to my company and you worked for our competitor, that's one of the first questions I'd want to ask. Why? Because you naturally think, are you a spy? Like, what's going on? What happened? So you have to have some very strong and compelling reasons to be able to apply and explain that. But if you do that, absolutely. Let's see. Dawood says, should I write another motivation letter if I was asked for an interview just before the lockdown and it was postponed? I wouldn't. No. Folks, I was in a recruiter group earlier this week and I was talking to them and they're really feeling the push from people. You just don't want to overdo it. They know you're out there. They remember you. If anything, just sending them a note of, I hope you're doing well. I hope you're okay. Or maybe you saw something funny or you saw something valuable and positive about your industry. Hey, I saw this and I thought of you. Hope you're doing well. That's all you need to do right now. Really, it's circling back on jobs. Everything's on pause. And circling back just a lot of recruiters are going to lose their jobs. And the fact that they can't update you and help you and tell you where they're at makes them feel even worse. So you really don't want to do that. And I'm glad you asked. Swetha says, hello, can I apply for multiple positions at the same company if I'm qualified for them and they have very close job descriptions? Ooh, that's tricky. My answer to that is I would first try to find somebody in the organization that works in recruiting and HR and ask them for permission. I'll be honest with you. Some companies love it and feel like, yeah, apply away. And if you make it through, we'll look at it. Some hate it. And they don't make that clear on their careers pages, which they really should. So I think you go to LinkedIn, find a hiring manager for one of the positions, ask them to connect. And then when they connect with you, say, I'm seeing, 6 or 7 positions that I'm technically a fit for without knowing much about them. Is it appropriate to apply to multiple positions at your company or will I be penalized? I don't want to stuff your inbox. Great logical question. The recruiter is going to love the fact that you were sensitive to that. Will give you some kind of answer and then you can move forward. Plus, you'll now be on their radar screen. So it's actually a twofer. Not only do you get clarification, but it's a great way to network. All right, team. So listen, oh, really cute. I just want to say when I'm seeing a comment here from Captain Kitty Cat, what a great name. It says, haven't had a chance to post on the app, but wanted to say thank you for the Work It Daily program. I followed what you said and landed a great job that I've been at since October. You were 100% right. Well, I will take that, Captain Kitty Cat. That is so awesome to hear. I love when people share that. Thank you so much. We love what we do. And it's always inspiring. We get love notes like that every day and they never get old. We love them so much. All right, folks. Thank you so much for stopping by. Listen, Thursday in 2 days, I am going to be doing a killer session on 24 mega trends that you are going to see post-crisis. It's based on 4 main trends and 6 trends within each one, 24 mega trends. And the reason that we want to get this information out to you is that if you can understand these mega trends, you can start to see where the opportunity is going to lie as the crisis starts to come to an end. And I think this is very insightful information, and we're so excited to present it to you. So please come back Tuesday, 2 p.m. Eastern, to learn about the 24 mega trends that are going to be coming out of this crisis that you're going to want to think about and understand and consider how they're going to affect your career. And more importantly, how can you use them to your advantage? Right? So come back next time, okay? All right. And don't forget, if you need help with your resume, your cover letter, your LinkedIn profile, we are just a phone app and a web page away. Head on over to Work It Daily. Try us out for a month. I promise you'll be hooked, okay? All right, everyone. Thanks again for stopping by. I loved hanging out with you all, and I will see you all on Thursday. Bye, everyone.